Hi, my name is Mackenzie, and this is my applied assignment for this year. For this assignment, I chose to cover the mental and social experiences of families of PWDs, or people with disabilities. In this presentation, we'll cover my pre-work, which is just what I knew before, the materials I found within the course readings and whatnot, and why I chose this topic. And then we'll go over my research, which is what I found outside of the course. I have a couple of those. New learning, what I learned from my interview that I conducted and my outside research, and how that relates to the lessons we've already gone over in class. And then continued inquiry, so I want to learn more about this and what I can learn and what I want to ask you guys. So for my pre-work, I chose this topic, mental and personal experiences of families of people with disabilities. Kind of a mouthful, but I am looking to go into education, but specifically special education. So at some point in the future, I am going to be working with these families who have disabled children, and I just wanted to know more about their personal experiences, what the positives have been, what the negatives have been, so that I know what I can do and how I can improve on that as someone who will be important to these families and these children's lives in the future. And I just wanted to know more about their experiences. And for this particular assignment, I chose to cover mental and social aspects of inclusion. So kind of like community, but just personal experiences, being a parent or a family member of a disabled person in your family or household. I chose to interview my mom's friend, or like a family friend of ours, Ashley Thomas. She has a son named Jackson. He's about 4 or 5 right now, and he's diagnosed autistic. So I wanted to interview her because I knew she'd know more about just her experiences as the mother of a disabled child, how she's dealt with that, some of the things she's had to struggle with, and some of the things she's loved, and just her experiences raising a child with autism. Background, I actually have, you can see in this slide back here, my family. I have 3 younger brothers, and 2 of them are actually diagnosed autistic. So I've had a little bit of experience being an actual family member of someone with a disability, but with her being a parent and not just a sibling, I wanted to know her experiences, and I just wanted to get someone outside of my family to get kind of like a separate party opinion to interview. So I've had a little bit of experience, but I wanted to know more of her social or like personal experiences being the mother of her autistic son. For my materials from this course, I actually chose both of them from Module 6, which was about families. The first one was Family Life Goes On, Disability in Contemporary Families. And I used this article to learn about common dynamics, or just kind of the ways these families work when they're living with someone with a disability. So how that affects their lives and how just their dynamics change with having one of their members be disabled. For example, it could be economic hardships, just like financial struggles, or increased emotional resilience because of the things they have to deal with and understand being the caretaker or family member of someone with a disability. And I also chose from that same Module 6, Introduction to the Special Issue, Family Support of Persons with Disabilities Across the Life course. And this was a journal entry that I enjoyed reading because it explains more about the actual support that the family members provide to their loved ones, and how that affects them. So whether it be emotional, physical, how they being a caretaker will affect them personally, and their experiences with just having a disabled family member. And then my personal research, not from the courses, I chose 2 more. Sorry. The first one being Impact of Disabilities on Families. And this article was super interesting because it kind of went into more of the negatives and positives of being the caregiver of someone with a disability. And the thing I found most interesting about this one is, the rest of my research has been mostly about being the family member of a young child with a disability, and this one was focusing on the elderly and how that can be a different experience than living with a disabled child. So that was interesting because I knew I couldn't get any of that information from my interview since she obviously has a young son and not any elderly disabled people in her home. So this was interesting to get a new perspective on that. And then this last one I think is my favorite one out of all of them. It's very strong evidence of the correlation between mental health in parents of children with disabilities and being parents of children with disabilities. So it's called Child Disability as a Family Issue, a study on mothers and fathers' health in Italy. And this one is just essentially reporting the mental and general well-being of parents, both a group that is the parents of a non-disabled child and parents that are the parents of a disabled child, and comparing their mental and physical well-being, and finding that the parents of disabled children reported lesser mental health and lower general health, showing that it can be mentally and physically taxing to be a caregiver, compared to those who do not have disabled children. And then my evidence of my interview with Ashley. This is a text thread that I had with her. We were going over when we were going to interview. I ended up calling her on the phone. We talked for about 30 minutes or so. And it's just a confirmation of that. And then during our actual interview, I took a couple notes. I have about 3 pages here. I can't read super well, but these are just my interview questions highlighted and then some bullet points of some of her responses below. And I have bits of recording for some of it, but these are just my notes for the entire interview. From everything that I've learned, I chose a few quotes out of the interview I did with Ashley because I thought they were really impactful and really stood out to me for these aspects of inclusion. So, for inclusion, I chose the quote, "It's hard to deal with judgment from others. I see their faces in public when it gets loud and they don't really understand." Meaning, her son is nonverbal, so he, instead of speaking like you or I might, he would just express himself pretty loudly. And my brother is the same way, so I kind of understood that. But just kind of yelling, making a lot of noise, and it can be different for some people. But she was just talking about how, like, when you go out in public, he might be yelling and you can see other people not understanding why he's doing that and just being judging initially and not letting him, or not including him as one of their own people, accepting him as a person and just viewing him as this outsider. And this stood out for me because it showed how difficult it is for people with disabilities to be included in society in something as simple as just going out in public. Ashley, just being the mother of her child, gets dirty looks from random people because her son communicates differently than you and I might, because they're these people you look at and you see something different and they're not being inclusive and they're just thinking of the worst possibility and thinking it's an outsider behavior. And this kind of reminded me of our lesson back in Module 3 about inclusion practices. And we talked about what it means to be unaccepting in a society, what that affects, or how that affects the person with a disability. It could be lack of employment because there's not enough inclusion in your minds, like socially, and lack of community inclusion, so like they can't maybe be included in social events as much as someone who is not disabled might be because of this lack of inclusion. We see people with disabilities as kind of outsiders. So this quote really stuck out to me because I thought that was a good example of how difficult it can be and how simple these things that I might take for granted, just going to the store, might be difficult for someone with a disability. For the next, for equity, I chose the quote, "It can be difficult to find the same opportunities for Jack," which is her autistic son, "as I have for her other child. Enrolling him, Jack, in the right school was much harder. The expectations are higher and harder to meet." And this stuck out to me because it just shows that you can have 2 children, right? But the one who is disabled, you have to work so much harder to get him in the same opportunities as your child who's not disabled. So she was just talking about how you have to go through all these extra steps to get him enrolled in the correct school and the correct programs and all these things that are especially made for him. And it's way different than dealing with your child who doesn't have a disability, where it's so much easier to just enroll and be done. And it's not as difficult to get in the right or equal opportunities even. Just being a parent, you have to deal with those two different things. And this kind of reminded me in module 2, when we were reading an article called People with Learning Disabilities Still Face Unacceptable Inequalities in Healthcare, and how someone with a disability will have to fight so much harder to get the same opportunities or same treatment as someone without a disability, just like Ashley had to fight so hard for her son to get the same schooling opportunities as her non-disabled daughter. And she had to work so much harder just to get him at that point, which is not equitable. But it reminded me of that. And I think this quote it really stuck out to me because it represented that. The last quote I chose for accessibility would be, I have to take a lot of time off work. He has a lot of meetings, Jack, and he has a lot of meetings. There are a lot of meetings to emphasize, and I have to be there for them. It can be difficult sometimes because I need to work. And this stuck out to me because it's something that I wouldn't even think about, because if you have maybe a neurotypical or a non-disabled child, you drop them off at school, you can go to work, and you don't really think twice about it. But she's saying she has to take a lot of this time off work to be there for him, and it affects financially, because obviously having multiple children, you need to work. And she was talking about how how much time that she has to dedicate that most other parents don't have to, just to get him the same, or like in good opportunities. And this kind of reminded me of in Module 5, we read a reading called Equity Gaps for Students with Disabilities. And this was kind of just talking about kind of the same thing, the lack of access to resources, financially, educational, just like Jack's mom was facing with this. So I think this quote was a good representation because it makes you think about how you have to force yourself into these different opportunities that people who may have like non-disabled kids wouldn't have to. My continued inquiry. Moving on from this project, in the future, I want to know more about the difference between being the family member of a mentally versus physically disabled person. So as I said, my two younger brothers, or two of them, are autistic, and Ashley's son also has autism. So I have, at this point, a lot of experience with being the family member or the parent of a mentally disabled child, but I guess I'd like to know more about what the difference would be, if it would be more demanding or less demanding, or just what the difference would be if you had a physically disabled person in your household or your family rather than a mentally disabled person. And to learn more about this, I think I will try to, if not as formally, just ask someone who is a close relative to a physically disabled person, and ask them what their experiences have been like, and then kind of compare them to what I've learned so far from this. And then also just look up articles, read a little more on that, read what the effects could be, other people's stories, what they feel about it. And then my question for you would be, what experiences do you have with people with disabilities, and how does your relationship to them change your life and your dynamic with them? These are just all the links to the sources I used for this project. If you wanted to go check them out for yourselves. And that is all. So I hope you liked that. Thank you so much.